Hello everybody and welcome to this demo of the Rui version 0.0.0. In this tutorial we're going to go over the functionality of the Rui, how to use it for spatially registering tissue blocks into reference organs in the Common Coordinate Framework. So as we go into the Rui, which as you can see is web deployed here, we are being greeted with this modal, meaning a window that we have to go through to get to the actual application. So we're prompted to type in our name. So I'm going to type in my name, first and last. Then we choose the donor sex. In this case, let's go with female. And then we have to select an organ. So we have this organ carousel here. Let's go over here to the lung, one of my favorite organs. Then we click Start Registration. And here we go. So this is the Rui proper. On the left hand, we have the so-called anatomical structures pane. In the middle, we have the 3D pane, and on the right side, we have the manipulation pane. The anatomical structures pane here on the left shows us the, anatomical structures that we have inside the 3D organ here. You can see that these parts here, they correspond to individual substructures in the big organ here in the middle. So for example, I can turn these on and off, and I can change the opacity. So you can see as I hover over these, you notice that this opacity slider here appears and disappears. So I'm going to go ahead and I hover over left lung hilus, and then I just play with this opacity slider here. Then you can see down here in this area, this has become more opaque now. Let me change that again for you, something lower. Here we go, that's almost completely disappeared. In fact, I can turn it off completely by clicking this eye icon. Let me turn on the opacity a little higher so you can see it better. So I can turn off, on, off. If I want to reverse it to the default, I just click the circular arrow button. And I can do the same thing for all of the anatomical structures using the circular arrow up here. In order to demonstrate landmarks, we're going to go over to another organ. We're going to go to the kidney. You can always change your reference organ using the carousel up here. I'm going to go to the left kidney. Here we go. So for the kidney, we have one landmark, which is the bisection line. So I'm going to hover over this. They are turned off by default. I turn them on, and I turn the opacity up. And you can see this green landmark being imposed here, and this is the bisection line. Okay, so much for the anatomical structures pane here. Let's go to the meat of the matter. Let's go to the 3D stage, or the 3D pane. So here in the middle we have the organ. This is a 3D space, okay? And then you can also see that we have camera controls up here. So here I can change the virtual camera that I'm using to look at my organ. The organ is static. We are just moving a virtual camera around it. So here I can rotate around the organ in 90-degree increments. So currently I'm looking at it from the anterior perspective. And now when I click this button, I look at it from the right side. And if I click this button, I look at it from the back or the posterior perspective. In order to help us understand the orientation of our camera to the full body, we have this little mannequin here on the right. So you can see anterior, looking from the front. Now we're going over to the right. And so we can go over to the left, etc., etc. Of course, this is very restrictive. So we added this 3D preview mode. So you can go from the rigid camera control, which is in the register mode, to a slightly more free version, going over to the 3D preview. And now I can use my mouse buttons, okay? And I press and hold my left mouse button. I can rotate the camera. If I press and hold my right mouse button, I can pan the camera, so I can move it sideways and up. And if I use the mouse scroll wheel, or two fingers on your touchpad, depending on how you're using your machine, you can zoom in and out. So for now, I'm going to go back to the registration mode. Okay, so you might have noticed this yellow tissue block over here. This is the tissue block that we are going to register. We're going to talk in a second about how you can resize it and rotate it. For now, let's just talk about how you can move it. So just two ways for moving it. One, when you are in the registration mode, you can hover over it with your mouse and then press and hold the left mouse button, and that way you can move the block along 2 dimensions. Okay, so currently we are moving the block along the X and Y axis. You can see the coordinates of the block. Those are the coordinates of the block. going up and down, left and right, you can see that the z-axis is static. Okay. Now, if I switch to the right side, let's go to the left so we can actually see it, and I move it around now, you will see that the x-axis is now static because we're moving it along the z-axis and along the y-axis. Alright, let's get this back over here. Let's go into the anterior view. Now, a second way to move the tissue block is by using the Q, W, E, A, S, D buttons. Okay, so you might recognize this if you've ever played a video game on a keyboard. So if I press the W button, you're going to see that the tissue block now moves upwards in 0.5 millimeter increments. If I press S, it moves downwards. You can see how the Y position is decreased. Likewise, A and D moves it along the X-axis. Okay, again in 0.5 millimeter increments. And now let's go over to the right side to see the Z-axis movement. That is done with Q and E. So Q increases the Z position and E decreases the Z position. This is a fantastic way for making some really fine adjustments that you might not be able to do with your mouse. Now, the neat thing about this is that this also works in the 3D preview. In the 3D preview mode, we use our left mouse button to move the camera so we can't move the block. So if we want to move the block now, we can simply use our keyboard. So let's say I wanted to align this tissue block with the bisection line. I can go back to register, go back to anterior, and now let's go over here to do the coarse alignment. Okay. And then I go to 3D preview, and let's zoom in. It's a little far away. Let's go to the left side here. Actually, let's go to the right and move this closer. All right, now we're getting pretty close. Now let's go into 3D preview mode. Rotate around, zoom in, and pan slightly. Alright, so now we're at the point where we have to rotate the cube. And all of this is done here in the manipulation pane. So let's go over this one by one. Here you can set the tissue block dimensions. You can see width, height, and depth. The default is 1 cubic centimeter or 10 cubic millimeters. I'm going to leave this as is for now. If I were to resize this, let's make this a little bit bigger. You would see that this reformats instantly. Let's go back to 10 millimeters. And one thing that I would like to emphasize here is that when you set the Z dimension, so when you set the depth, make sure that this aligns to the cutting direction of your cube. So for example, if you were working on a cube that you were dissecting into slices along the long side, you should make sure that the long side is going to be the depth. This is very important. So let's go back to 10 for now. So now the interesting part, how do we actually align this? Here, by the way, you can type in the thickness of the slices and the number, although that is just metadata right now. And then here we have the tissue block rotation. So you can use these sliders to rotate the tissue block around any of these three axes. Okay, so let's go ahead and try that. I want to align my block with the bisection line. So first I can rotate around the y-axis, like so. Looks about right. And now let's rotate around the x-axis. Here we go. It's always a little bit of a trial, but there we go. And now we can use our keyboard again to move the block farther towards the bisection line. I'm using the E key and then the S key to really get a nice and proper alignment without having to use my mouse. Beautiful. All right, now we are aligned. We are just on there on the bisection line. Of course, we are also somewhat close to the edge of the kidney, so let's move it around a little bit by using the D and the E button. Here we go. Now we're just moving towards the inside of the kidney. All right, wonderful. If you would like to reset any of these dimension, tissue slices, or tissue block rotation, you can also use those circular arrow buttons. So finally, I would like to talk about the anatomical structure tags. Here you can see that this is quite populated. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to reset the rotation and the position of the tissue block. Here we go. So now the tissue block is outside of the kidney, and you can see here that the anatomical structure tags down here are completely unpopulated. Now, as I grab the tissue block and move it into the kidney, you're going to see suddenly a whole bunch of these pills appear. And you can see that all of these correspond to an anatomical structure over here. So we have the renal column, for example, which we have right here. We have the outer cortex of the kidney. Outer cortex of the kidney is right here. So we are using a feature called collision detection between 3D objects. If you've ever watched a Hollywood movie or played a video game that uses CGI, oftentimes collision detection is being used to compute physics that should happen afterwards, such as an explosion or deformation. Now, in our case, if two objects collide, it's something much more innocent. We just get an anatomical structure tag. Okay, so I'm going to pull it out again. You can see that they disappear. This is all done in real time. Pull it back in. And then you can see that even as I move it inside of the kidney, these anatomical structure tags change because we constantly collide with new things as we go along. Okay, now let's say you have a tissue block here and you read these anatomical structure tags and you're like, well, it really does not collide. I did not take the sample from the capsule at all. You can just click this X here and delete it. And then you could, for example, say, well, but I think it really collided with the hilum of the kidney, but I don't see it tagged here. Then you can just type in hilum. And you can see this is a controlled vocabulary. You can only add anatomical structures, as I said earlier. Click the checkbox and the plus, and then it's added here automatically. You can see it's colored differently because you added it manually. All right, so we went over how you perform the registration, but now we actually have to discuss what you do with the data, how you get the registration data out of it. So if you use the standalone version of the RUI, which I'm demonstrating here, you can click this review and download button here in the bottom corner, and then you get this registration review window where we see all of the data that we just generated. So we see the first and last name of, me, the operator. Then we have the reference organ name. We have some geometric information, the dimensions, position, and rotation. Then we have these anatomical structure tags. You may want to double check these before you save the data out. A timestamp and an alignment ID, which is just a unique identifier. So then we click download registration data. I'm going to download this here to my machine. And then I suggest, let's just have a look at it. I'm going to open this here in a code editor. Okay, so this is what the data that we just generated looks like. We have a whole bunch of boilerplate information up here. Then we have the creator first name and last name. We have the date. We saw all of that just a second ago in the review window. These CCF annotations correspond to the anatomical structure tags, except now here we have strings that represent URLs. Okay. Here we have the dimension, which is 10 by 10 by 10 millimeters. And then here we have the placement object. And then this object, we have the scaling, we have the rotation, and we have the translation that corresponds to the 3D position that we set earlier. All right, that looks great. So there's another really neat thing that you can do with this JSON object that we just exported, and that is we can reload it into another instance of the RUI. So I'm gonna click this. I'm going to refresh my browser, which of course deletes everything that we just did, because again, it runs client side in the browser. So, but I want to, let's say I want to edit an existing registration, or I want to just work with an existing registration, change it slightly and create a template that way. So I can type in my name again. I go to my organ and I choose the donor sex, left kidney. And now you can see all of this is just as it was at the beginning of our last experiment, where nothing is rotated, nothing is repositioned. But now we can click this Upload Previous Registration Data button, and then I navigate here to where I saved the registration data earlier. I click Open. And then, like with magic, the tissue block was reset here into the middle where we had it earlier, and this way you can beautifully use these JSON files as templates for future registrations. All right. If you check this information button up here on the right, you get information about the RUI itself. You also get some information here about the background, what it has to do with HubMap. We link to a standard operating procedure, and there are also acknowledgements in here. Alright, in this tutorial I showed you how to use the registration user interface to perform a tissue registration for one of our many 3D reference organs. And I hope that you enjoy using the tool as much as we enjoyed it making it. Thank you.